Shalom, shalom, friends. Welcome to another open room with your boy CJ here on the Synagogue. Blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and of course, all glory be to Him. Been a long time no see. To kind of give you guys a little bit of a background onto that while we wait for some people to join us today. I was pretty sick with some food poisoning at the beginning of this year. And then I did a stream. Actually, I told you guys about that when I did a stream with the Raging Atheist here, right? And we kind of had that back and forth political stream. And then literally right after that, my computer decided to crash on me. And I have had the computer now back for about 4 or 5 days. So at least for the last 4 or 5 days, it's only been my own personal slacking. But just so you know, it wasn't all just, or even mostly this personal slacking. A lot of it was just the fact that unfortunately I was not actually able to get stuff up. But I do want you guys to know that we do actually have that Lilith video coming out this Saturday for real this time, I swear. We'll see, right? Who knows? Lord willing. But I will have the Lilith Unapologetics Light out this Saturday. I've actually already started recording it, so that's nice. And then, of course, the Old Testament canonization, Unapologetics on Sunday. Finally want to have that out. Watchdogs have been obviously severely neglected, so we want to start getting those up. There is a lot to talk about, and frankly, I honestly feel as if I need to repent for neglecting Watchdogs because it's a lot. I mean, there is a lot of information, and I think the body really needs to be aware of it. But nonetheless, we are definitely going to have that up. I don't know if we'll have a Watchdog up this week, but I'm thinking tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Wednesday. That'll be Wednesdays are when we usually are one of the days that we usually have them on. So I'm thinking that'll be a good thing. And maybe even later on tonight too, since I haven't had one in so long, even though it's usually supposed to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe just like a makeup Watchdog is in order. I haven't quite decided on that yet, but nonetheless, just to give you guys some of those announcements. Also, I do have a second channel in the works, one that is more media related, one that will not be so heavy with political, historical, philosophical, religious topics, though, of course, it will absolutely be to the glory of Jesus Christ, as everything else that we as Christians should do, should be rather. So if you guys are interested in that sort of thing, I'll be doing stuff like, movie reviews and stuff like that, basic media stuff, but, coming at it from a, of course, Christian perspective. And, there's not a lot of announcements about that so far, but just know that is something that I am thinking about having in the works there. Now, the link, so you guys know, to join this is actually in the description. Please do read my rules. They will be enforced. Speaking of one of those rules, there does appear to be somebody in the back, but I don't actually know this person. Does anybody by chance know who Will would be? He's got like a monkey or an ape avatar. I can't really tell. It looks like a chimpanzee, I guess. Just so you know, Will, one of those rules is the need for an advocate in order to prevent people from either trolling or porn bombing or something like that. Yeah, that is me, says Baptist Chad. Okay. All right. Shalom, brother.
Hey, what's up? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And then Mr. Parker, I of course know Mr. Parker. Shalom, nice to have you here as well. Also, real quick in the live chat, I want to acknowledge Brother Nicholas is here. Jeremy Martin, Brother Jeremy is here. We have Sister Erica here as well. Thank you guys all for being here with us today. Don't have a set topic. It's going to be an open room, but we'll, kind of take it wherever. Yeah, and kind of, give the floor to you guys real quick. If there's anything you'd like to say to start us off.
Are we limited to just talking religious or political or?
Well, so I was kind of more looking forward to religious or philosophical conversations. That said, I did tag you right in that Twitter post, and I know that our conversations are almost entirely political in nature. So if that's something that you want to bring up, by all means, it is certainly open room.
Yeah, I don't know if you. What's your opinion on raising the minimum wage?
That's a good question, actually. So I am opposed to it. My belief is that our goal, economically speaking, should not be to increase the amount of money people have, but to increase the worth of the money that people already have. I think that giving people more and more money is irrelevant if the money is just going to continuously lose value over time. And in fact, if you give people more and more money and add to inflation, you're just going to, what's the word? Expedite that process, right? The goal should be, in my opinion, to have not only to make it to where 725 would actually be livable, albeit struggling, but even less than that, right? I would like to see a society where somebody could make $5 an hour and afford an apartment. That would be fantastic, and I feel like that should be the goal, because that is a feasible goal, right? We do, to an extent, control the value of our money.
Yeah, we do have control over the value of money, but it's more difficult to control like housing and like renting and like making policies to make them so that the value of money is actually greater. So I think increasing like the minimum wage would actually bring it back to its original value, because like, with inflation, it's decreased the value of the dollar from like originally 2007 or 2008 when they increased it to 725. With inflation, its buying power has like decreased by $1 already, and which I think is like why we need to raise it up, because I think like about the 60s or the 70s, I think like it was like 150, and that's like about $12 today in buying power.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case too. It is interesting, actually, that with the advocate for raising the minimum wage, I completely agree on that point. Because there is an obvious, in fact, my grandfather, who's not terribly old, he's only in his 70s, right? I mean, I know it's old, but it's not like 90s or anything like that. The man was growing up in the 60s, and he often talks to me about how he used to make excuse me, when he was working, like just sort of odd jobs. Oh, excuse me again. Not odd jobs, excuse me, but like menial labor, like McDonald's kind of stuff, like something like $2, $3 an hour or something like that, like a really small amount, right? But it wasn't a big deal because there wasn't actually much he couldn't afford with stuff like that. And, he would talk, and Ron Paul actually has an anecdote like this as well, where he talks about when he was delivering babies, right, which is a multiple thousands of dollars operation in the modern day. He says the most he ever charged somebody was $350, right? And so there is certainly something that needs to be done in that, like, people's money is not going as far as it did, and that's absolutely the case. My view, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the buying power, like historically, especially with older generations, has been devalued, and that's why when I see people like, well, back in my day, I earned $3 and whatever, and then like you calculate that in inflation, well, that's like more than the minimum wages now, and so I think there's a little bit of not knowledge about like how inflation actually has greatly influenced the value of our money and the increasing of living and like other commodities that people need.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, though, is I would argue that is, while that is true, the answer to that would not then be to raise the gross number of dollars in circulation, or a gross number of dollars that people would actually have in their possession, but rather to try and find a way to either stop, slow down, or reverse that process. And I do think there are ways that it can be achieved. One of the most important ways, I think, and you can even kind of actively see this happening with China as sort of a proof of it. If you do control the means of production, that does a lot to bump the value of your dollar. And when we're here in the United States, we don't control the means of production of virtually anything anymore. In fact, a lot of people have just sort of accepted that we're more of a service-based economy and then moved on. I personally think that's a flaw. And like I said, you can kind of see that with the Chinese government in that I can't remember what it's actually called, but they're equivalent to $1. It's rising in value and has been for decades, right? As they're getting more and more of the means of production and those kinds of, tangible labor jobs, in their borders. I think that's a huge deal. I also think that, having your currency tied to something other than a central bank, maybe not necessarily the gold standard. There are certainly some flaws with that. And people could argue that, we don't even have enough gold in the world to account for things like the American debt, for example. And that could totally be the case. So maybe it can't be a gold standard, but something other than an arbitrary thing like the Federal Reserve, right? Like a central banking system where they can literally, quote unquote, control the money supply and inflation rate, which is just hogwash. It's completely, it's a bogus system of economics is what I'm trying to say, right? Keynesian economics does not work. I'm glad that for the most part, actually, a lot of true conservatives and true progressives actually agree on that point because it's just true. But yeah, like I said, I think that would also be a big deal. So controlling the means of production, I think, would increase the value of our dollar and increase our buying power. Absolutely. And also, I think things like, getting us outside, getting our currency tied to something other than this arbitrary system, like a central banking system, something similar to the gold standard, even if it's not explicitly the gold standard, right? Even if we have to replace gold with something else, but it's just something that ties the value of that dollar and kind of down to physical, reality. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been listening to podcasts about the concept of value and how money has been treated and how markets especially impact that, and the housing market clearly demonstrates that money doesn't exactly equate to value, because clearly in the housing crisis, houses were free because no one wanted to buy a house, but the value of them didn't disappear. There's still houses there. It's just no one wants to buy them because of economical crisis, whatever. And so I think the removal of some things from the market can actually help the value of the dollar, so it's not dependent on speculation about how some markets would actually do, because that's how some major corporations make their money, is just by speculating. It's well, I think airlines will increase, so I'm going to invest stock now or whatever, and it's really speculative ideology about how money will converse. So I think the freedom of having a house without buying it, removing this, completely getting rid of the housing market would actually help, I would think, with the value of money, because you don't have to spend it on housing, because if you remove something that you spend money on, then you actually increase the pricing or the value of your dollar.
Well, and there might be some truth to that. I guess I'd have to kind of think about it a little more. I do know the real estate one is kind of particularly volatile, just because you can have a real estate market crash due to prosperity, actually. A lot of people don't realize this, but you have more and more people move to an area because the area is prosperous, right? These booms, right, that created Virginia City and Nevada, for example, and stuff like that. And all over, you see them all over Alaska and stuff, because a lot of times it happened due to mining. Not always, though. It happened to Palo Alto because of technology and so on and so forth. But basically, all these people, they flock to this area, typically with a lot more money than the people in the area, because a lot of times urban areas are just by default more expensive, right? They flock to these areas, they buy a bunch of property, they rent a bunch of property, rent rates go up, which of course means that rent rates across the board go up, which includes things like apartments and things like that, right? People start building more and 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 more, and the prices go up and up and up and up and up and up and up, and it's all because it's a prosperity and growth. But then eventually it just stops, because that's just the way things go, right? And now you have a whole bunch of ridiculously expensive houses and people who aren't actually able to buy them. And that's happened now in the United States to 8 or 9 different states on the West Coast, or on the west side, I should say, not necessarily on the coast, but like Idaho, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, right? Typically, it's from people from California because people from California tend to make a lot of money because they have to, right? It's just got a very they live in a very expensive place, but then they have all this money. You go to this area, and it's all because of prosperity, but the prosperity actually leads to a market crash. And really, that can kind of happen with any product in theory. I mean, you see that happen, like, the story of, this is sort of a funny example, but VeggieTales, right? VeggieTales was growing so much that eventually something like 25% growth was considered to be a net loss, right? And they just crashed as a result. And, I don't know if there's any way to necessarily avoid that. I think to a certain extent, that's part of human nature. And I think it's also part of just the nature of markets. You know what I mean?
I think like I was kind of referring to the whole idea of speculative investing, and like why like okay, like thousands of immigrants are coming to New York, so we need to build thousands of apartments for them. But like then you don't have that many immigrants coming, so then the value kind of increases due to the fact that you spent so much money building all these apartments. Now you have to get back money by increasing the rent. And that's how I would describe how the value of money has greatly decreased, is because of speculative investing in certain markets like housing. You see like people build like hundreds of neighborhoods, but then you only see like 10 or 5 people move in, and you wonder why they struggle a little bit financially, is due to the fact that these big companies that build neighborhoods are investing so much money, and not everyone they expect comes, and then they have to increase the rent or whatever.
Well, and then that is certainly something that happens, right? And that's kind of, I guess, part of my point, right? Is there's a lot of different factors that lead to this sort of thing. Like that is obviously one example. And another example is kind of like what I was just saying, right? Where you have people, you sell a house for $1 million in California, and you can come to Wyoming, and that exact same house is $200,000. And so you can buy 5 of them. And then you rent those houses for, however much you want to rent them, or maybe you flip them and sell them for $250,000 or $300,000, right? And it just goes up that way. That's something that's happening in my own state at this moment, right? And it's not speculative. The people are actually here, and they're actually moving here, but they're moving here with such I guess the word would be just high amount of money, the term, right? They just have so much money in value, or not in value, in gross amount, that they're just able to spend a lot more of it, buy a lot more things, raise the prices as a result, and here kind of we are. You know what I mean? I mean, just my own living situation has had an increase of rent that I had to pay $300 in the last 3 years as a result of this very trend. And again, you're right. It's not like a speculative thing. And I know I'm describing it probably very poorly. But it's actually a result of prosperity and people wanting to move and growth in the economy.
But like, can you say due to the fact that they think it's going to keep prospering, that they're going to speculate a little bit more, so they're going to build a little bit more than they need to?
Eventually, yes. Eventually, that will happen, and that'll cause the bubble to pop, right? For sure. To an extent, I almost think that could be a positive thing, because a lot of times when the bubble pops, the price of land itself actually kind of depletes ridiculously. And I mean, land ownership is one of the best ways for the little guy, in my opinion, to keep power. It's part of the reason why I disagree with property tax, because I think, while property tax has a certain impact on the rich, in the end, when you're paying like 1% of the value of your property, or even 5% of the value of your property, and you have millions of dollars, I mean, nobody really cares. It's fine. But if you're paying 5% of the value of your property every year, and you may potentially have a net worth of 6 figures, maybe, right? Probably not, considering the fact that the vast majority of Americans have a median income somewhere between 30 and 65,000. Right. That would indicate to me that would be much more impactful on those people. And I think those people should absolutely have land, because it sort of operates as really the same way guns do, in my opinion, right? It's sort of it's an economic defense more than it is a physical defense, but it's a defense, I think, against elitism. I have my own land. I can grow my own food. I have a place for my family to live, right? And that's a little off topic, to be fair. But the point being, I think it's positive when the prices deplete on the housing market, even though I know it does end up kind of killing a lot of companies financially. Sometimes that's just necessary for the market to move forward.
I think you're being a little bit too I don't know what the word to describe. Like, you think that the common man will always, like, he sees the market crash, so then he sees it as a opportunity to buy more land. But, like, and then you also have to consider the fact that land, like, the market did come back for housing, and so, like, property and the value of them would increase. So then your taxation, like how much you had to invest, would increase as you bought it originally. So, and that's gonna be kind of difficult as, like, just a common man. Like, you're in, like, let's say you're in, like, 75,000 a year, or, like, your family owns that much, like a medium, whatever.
Right.
And you go, the housing crisis just happened, and you buy some cheap land. You have some properties, and you think, oh, I can just flip these. But then, due to, like, certain, like, because we also have to take into consideration, like, social factors, time, and, like, all these other different things on how flipping works, and can the common man actually do this successfully, and, like, does he actually make a turnout, or does he make a loss in the end due to how much he's investing to the property? So it still comes back down to speculative thinking about the market. It's like, okay, if I buy the property at $10, that's not realistic, but, like, $10 now, and then I flip it back later in the market, I can make $50. But if you invest, like, $70 into it, you're not making a profit. And I don't think that's where the speculative part is, where I'm like, that's not a good thing, because that just hurts a lot more people much easier.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's a high risk, high reward game. You know what I mean? Like, it does hurt some people, but it definitely benefits some people. And, to an extent, we do have to let people's own, personal prerogative be allowed, I guess. Right. So, and I'll just give you a perfect example. So, a lot of people are familiar with Robinhood, right? The stock trading app. And as a result, you have tons and tons of people who had never gotten into anything like stock trading who are now actually stock trading, even if it might be significantly smaller than some of the bigwigs and stuff like that. And so now we all get to see this basically poker game, for lack of a better term, right? Not literally, but it's gambling, right? And how it actually functions, and how the economy works based on it, or how this particular portion of the economy works based on it, at least. And one thing that I think that's taught a lot of people is that really losses a lot of times they almost have to be, like, fought into, to an extent. I'll give you a perfect example with Warren Buffett, right? Warren Buffett in 2008, all of his companies, just like virtually everybody's companies, had their stock deplete ridiculously. And people will ask Warren Buffett, well, how much money did you actually lose? And he says, nothing, because I didn't sell anything, right? You know when you're going to buy, when you're going to sell, when you're going to hold. It's just, you gotta be wise, right? You need to have some personal wisdom there. Now, that choice of him, that economic freedom, made it to where he didn't lose a single penny. He actually ended up making money in the end. And there's nothing that prevents the common man from doing that as well, even if it is to a smaller extent. You're I don't know, $5 stock in Ford. I don't know if that's even what the stock of Ford is, but let's just say it is, depletes to $1. Well, then just don't sell it. I mean, hopefully you weren't putting money you necessarily needed into the stock market anyways, because you're not a stock trader, right? And I think the same thing would apply to anything else. Know when you buy, know when you sell. You have to a certain extent, use a little bit of wisdom. A lot of it is based on speculation, but a lot of that speculation is very unwise. And there's always people who are in the background saying, hey, no, look, this is actually not a particularly good thing to do right now. This is the history that lays out why, or, the growth we've had in the last 5 years, you can't expect that to continue, or whatever it happens to be. Right. I think to an extent, that's just something that, it has to be allowed from a point of view of freedom. But freedom allows people to fail, I guess, is my point.
I think free markets in a way actually limits your freedoms in the sense of basic necessities like housing, water, and electricity. All these things you basically need to survive in a modern world. With the market, like with markets, gambling with such necessities, it makes your livelihood at risk. And it doesn't even have to be you directly involving in the stock market. It can just be, your bank took some of your money and invested it into the housing market, and now it's collapsed, and now you can't pay your next mortgage or whatever. And it's all like it's all connected in some form or another of how the market reacts and how the market like how other organizations you invest into um, do with your money, like banks especially.
Right, but I guess my issue with, and I don't know if you're explicitly involved in any of the different branches of Marxist thought, but this is an issue I have with Marxism, so I'm just going to respond as if that is the case, if you don't mind. And if you're not in any way Marxist, like socialist, communist, anything like that, that's perfectly fine. But my issue, I think, with a lot of the economic thought that kind of comes under the umbrella of Marxism is that I don't know if that's avoidable. Like we have this idea that things like alienation of the workforce and monotonous work and having your basic necessities become, things you have to work for and stuff like that and fight for even. We think of this as like a result of capitalism, but I kind of think it's just a result of being alive, honestly. Like, let me give you like a perfect example with the alienation part. And I'm sorry that I have to change the topic on that, but it's just one that I've thought of a little bit deeper. So you love art hypothetically, and you love painting, and you're very good at it, and you really, really, really want to be this person who is going out doing all the different things that artists do, going to the museum, whatever it is. I don't really know. I'm not into art, but you go on your tours, I guess, sell it to some highest bidder on eBay, right? And you want to make that your job, right? That's the thing that you want to have as your hobby, or not as your hobby, but as your job, and not just a hobby and all that kind of stuff. It's your dream, right? And you finally, over, however many years it takes you to accomplish this dream, achieve this dream. You are now an artist. You're now being paid for this. You don't have to go to any sort of job that you don't like, or sit in a desk, or flip any burgers, or anything like that. You just get to paint, right? So you shouldn't be alienated from your work, right? You shouldn't be in this Sisyphic sort of cycle where you're constantly doing the same thing and being forced by outside sources to do the same thing in order to maintain your status, but you do. Right? Nothing actually changed. And for a lot of people who do achieve their dreams, and you see this constantly in music because they talk about it a lot, right, in their songs, but it happens in art and in acting and all this other kind of stuff too. That just becomes the Sisyphic cycle, right? This is now the rock that you push up the hill every single day with seemingly no accomplishment at the end, right? And it just goes on forever and ever and ever and ever, and indeed is endless. And I don't know that anything could actually avoid that. I mean, you think of something like 500 years ago when we had even go farther than that, let's say 1,000 years ago, right? When capitalism was not really a thing outside of a small area of town in the marketplace, right? That's still what people were doing. You farm every single day, and it's the same farming, and it's the same grain you're pulling up. And, sometimes due to what appears to you to be random chance, we know a little bit more about climate and the weather and stuff like that, but you're a simple farmer. Sometimes it's not, no fault of your own, but all the crops failed, and that's just the way it is, and no fault of your own, but the crops actually did really well, and that's just the way it is, and it's going to be the same next year, and it's going to be the same for your boy and for his boy and for his boy, and so on and so forth. You know what I mean? And there's just no real way to stop that sort of thing, right? Like that's just kind of the nature of life. Work is alienating, and it's Sisyphic in nature, and it's cyclical in nature. And in the end, your basic necessities like housing, like water and food, they are things that you need to fight to maintain. We as a civilized society can make that burden lighter and lighter and lighter, as I think we should. But it's never going to actually change, right? There's always going to have to be something that has to produce it.
Yeah, I'm not like I follow some like Marxist theory and like thought a little bit. I haven't read much, but I have many books on it. But the Marxists thought about like commodification of basic necessities, is that like, yeah, we can lessen the burden of like how much effort you need to do this. Like I think personally, um, you deserve the right to a home or to food. And I'm not arguing that there won't be fighting or not fighting. Like you will always have a job in like these thoughts experiments or whatever, but it's not like in the same way that it has been original. Because like say you're a farmer 1,000 years ago, you're a farmer because your father was a farmer, and your feudal lord or whatever tells you you need a farm for the kingdom so he can eat his feast. Um, but under Marxist thought, that's not exactly why you would be a farmer in current society. It would be more of you're a farmer because you enjoy farming, and you if you have any extra, and providing that to the common good would actually be highly praised in society. And it's and sure the person who is farming the the wheat or whatever and giving it away could make demands in a Marxist world or whatever, but there's no necessity for them to do that if they have all their basic necessities. Like, I mean, they could want something back in return, but there's no reason for them to demand for more housing if they already have housing, or more food if they make their own food, or more water if they are already provided with enough water.
Well, but how does that sort of thing occur, right? Like in other words, how could you actually feasibly achieve a society where we can guarantee everybody housing and not have some sort of ridiculously egregious side effect? And I'll give you just as a perfect example, Muammar Gaddafi, actually, thing that not a lot of people know, he did actually a lot of really, really good things for Libya. He was actually a really good ruler, but he was still a dictator in the end, and dictators do what dictators do. And he killed people who he didn't like and all that other kind of stuff, right? And so we look at him as, of course, a very terrible ruler. Now, we have a particular blessing in the United States of having our worst tyrants usually be pretty benign, all things considered. Right? And so to a certain extent, I think we do look at other nations' leaders unfairly, but not actually going into that point and sticking to this point. It is true that Gaddafi provided all of his people with a free house upon their marriage, right? So that every family had a house, as well as like, I think $50,000 loan or something like that. And it was very beneficial to the society, but also that came at a cost, which was Gaddafi has power over everything, right? If he can give you all of that, that means that he has the power to not only give it, but take it away. It's in his possession. You know what I mean? The market does place that power in the end, not on the corporation, but actually on the consumer. I mean, if you stop purchasing, right, for example, Disney movies, they either have to change their strategy, or they're going to go out of business, right? And there's really no such thing as too big to fail when it comes to the market. We've seen that with tons of companies in the past, companies that people thought would be around forever, and they're not. I mean, some of these companies, like the NFL, right? Who knows if the NFL will actually struggle to that extent, but nobody would have expected the NFL to struggle as it has in the last 5 years, right? Because it's just this huge corporation. And I think that that's because really in the end, the market is the best you can get as far as actually putting that power in the hand of the consumer himself, or the common man himself. The sort of a negative to that is, whereas if you put it all in the power of one autocrat, he can give you a bunch of stuff, right? Or even a collection of autocrats like a council, right? Which I guess is an oligarchy, not autocracy, but nonetheless, the benefit to, or the lack of benefit to that is, of course, the loss of your freedom. Well, with the gain of your freedom would come the reverse of that, the lack of that stability coming from an outside source, right? The responsibility is now on you to provide that housing for yourself, but that also means that, at least if it's operating properly, which I would argue our current economic system has a lot of cronyism in it for sure. But if it's operating properly, that means that that's now your house. You don't have somebody else who can take that house away from you. It's your food. You purchased it. Nobody can take that away from you, right? Your farm to sit there and make, raise your cows and your wheat and all that other sort of stuff. The power isn't in the hand of a council or a person or a party or anything like that. It's now in your hands, right? And that does come with a lot of personal responsibility, which of course does mean a lot of stress, but it also comes with that freedom and, I guess a counter to oppression and tyranny.
I don't think markets, like, let's look at like housing or like food or like water production. Usually, like, say like bottled water, that's a big industry right now. um the commodification of bottled water, or the service of water, has been funded by corporations. And you can say that, well, okay, now the market is involved in the corporations, so now the common man can involve and get a say in what they do. But that doesn't make sense. If you need water, you're not going to protest against those who produce water, like the water that you drink, because then they can just stop providing that service. And of course, you can say, well, then like consumers won't buy from them, and then they'll go out of business right now. But is that entirely realistic? Like, is there like a corporation that provided such a necessity that they just epically? I mean, the housing market failed, but that's because of speculative bargaining and whatnot. But like water companies, like either they got bought out, or I would need an example of um, consumer, like, um, I don't know, like protesting against like major corporations that are monopolizing on like basic necessities like water or like food, and like saying like, and then the corporation's like, well, it's just the market. But it's not much of a market if there's only like 5 companies. Like, I forget, there's so many like water companies that all just go by like one company has like 3 different labels for the waters. I forget what it's called. Hold on.
Well, and so first I would say a couple things with that, actually. The first thing I would point out is that if you got bought out, more often than not, that is because you failed, right? I know that is sort of a loophole that companies kind of get around where they still get to stay afloat. But like Lucasfilm is not Lucasfilm anymore. It's Disney.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess, I'm more familiar with some of the tech markets and movie markets and stuff like that than I guess the specific companies in food. But I do know, like, for example, Kellogg's has collapsed before, and as a result are owned by other people. And a couple other people's like that. Quaker Oats is owned by other people. So now, but granted, that's not a complete and total collapse, right? So that certainly is a, I guess, interesting point. But I would also kind of argue that for the most part, at least in the recent past, Americans are not very aware of their ability to, vote with the dollar, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people just, and I to give the movie example again, a lot of people will say, I have friends who do this, but also you can just look at like, Rotten Tomatoes and Cinema Score and the people who are like the official critics and stuff. They'll sit there and they'll trash on all these movies, and then they'll go give money and endorsement to the next movie coming out by the same company with the same directors, right? It happens all the time. And that's, you have the power to make these people stop producing this product, right? You just choose not to. In a lot of ways, I think it's comfortability with a company. Sometimes it's because people really do like the product and they just kind of want to complain about it. I think that's the case with things like smartphones. But the point being that you can look at that, for example, like Blockbuster, right? Well, Blockbuster did go out of business because the market decided they weren't interested in that product anymore. Cable as an industry is just about to collapse. And it will probably never come back because the internet has rendered it obsolete, and people have decided I don't really like the basic.
That's not entirely consumer like sovereignty. Exactly. That's more of revolution in technology or progress in the industry. Like being conserved in your means, like, Blockbuster, they could have bought Netflix at some point, but they just thought what Netflix was doing was just bizarre and wouldn't work. And then of course now they're gone now. But that's not consumers saying Blockbuster is terrible to Netflix. It's more of like, it's more convenient. Like if Blockbuster did the same thing as Netflix, they would be like, I want to say on equal levels of competition, but they would still have some corporations interaction. It's not entirely just consumers against consumers when choosing between corporations.
Well, and that's actually fair. That is definitely fair, because all the examples I gave for sure would be, either advancements in technology or just better companies coming about. So that is certainly a good point. But I guess, as sort of a counterpoint, I would point out, like, so for example, with the boycotts in, what is it, 1955, I think, Martin Luther King, Birmingham bus boycott. Now, again, not a necessity. I'm not familiar with some of these food companies, I guess, to be honest with you. But with that particular example, right, it did end up having such an impact that the company or I guess in that point, it would be the public, I think. I think it would actually be the public transit. But nonetheless, they were losing so much money that rather than collapse, they decided to change their position, which, to be fair, in my opinion, is just as good. Because if you have something that, you disapprove of as a market, and you get the market to actually stop, doing that thing or producing that thing, that's effectively as good as the people who were putting forward that going out of business.
Like your example of like boycotting the buses in like Montgomery in the 1950s or whatever. That's not disagreeing with the product. That's more disagreeing with the company itself. It's not complaining about the prices to get on the bus and get off the bus. It's more of how they instituted the product, or like advertised it, or like the treatment of their customers, basically, is what they were complaining about. But like, you're not going to see someone complain about having water. They might complain about the pricing, which I think is the reason why people need to like advocate for like water to be a basic necessity and like not be commodified by the market, because you can't exactly protest a water company. I mean, you can have like well water or sewer water, but like basic like bottled water, if you go to like, say, like you live in America and you go down to Mexico, you can't exactly drink their tap water, and so you have to rely on corporations providing you a service of water. But that's not your own fault for not being accustomed to their water. It's just basic human biology with like different waters in the world.
Well, I mean, I think to an extent, though, that can't necessarily be pinned on the company either, for two reasons. Number one, if you're in the States, I mean, I get all my water out of a tap, you know what I mean? And I guess to an extent, I do have to, pay for that in the form of a utility. But it's significantly cheaper than anything like bottled water, right?
Yeah, but like as I mentioned earlier, like going to like Mexico and like you can't exactly drink their water because
right. So, but I kind of want to address that as a second point. Just because I think with this first point, while we're in the States, it does need to be noted that, and this is a result of the market, right? There is plenty of places where you can get water for free or near free. You can choose to purchase bottled water, but you can also choose to purchase a $10, Beretta filter. And I might be exaggerating on the price of that. It's probably more expensive, but nonetheless, and just filter your tap water or something like that. You know what I mean? And really, you don't even really need to do that. Actually, just a kind of a fun fact: if you boil your water and then bring it to cool, you can drink it virtually.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's obviously super primitive. But nonetheless, now you have a situation where you go to some place like Mexico, right? Or Somalia or some other place where unfortunately there's just not very clean water. Well, to an extent, that's not really, I mean, not even to an extent, just in straightforward, that's not the company that you bought the water from's fault. In fact, if anything, they're actually like a benefit here, right? Because they're taking you to an area now where you couldn't actually get this product, right? And now you can go to this area with this product in hand so that you don't have to do that sort of thing, right? It costs you maybe a little bit of money, I think, it's like $5 to get like a 12 pack of bottled water, which to be fair, that you're basically paying for plastic at that point. That might be a little bit too expensive. But the point being, though, that this company actually just provided a pretty awesome service. They hired people and took this water out and cleaned it and put it in a bottle so that you can actually take it now to a place where you otherwise would not actually be able to drink the water.
But like, what happens if this is like you're like in Africa and like you have to walk like 10 miles to get water, like, and it's not even good water? but then a company comes in, it's like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna provide you with clean water, like bottled water or whatever, but you have to like give us this X amount of money. Now they are helping out the community by giving you clean water and making your travels less of a burden, but are they not also exploiting their situation and not actually helping their situation? I mean, it's not entirely connected to the point of, it's not entirely relevant, but it's somewhat relevant on how corporations take advantage of basic necessities.
Well, I think there, you could argue that it's taking advantage of something. I guess to an extent, any opportunity is, honestly. Sometimes it's a benign taking advantage of, right? Like it's something like, well, nobody has a good chicken sandwich, so I'm going to make one, and then no harm, no foul. And other times it would be something serious like this. That said, though, I do think, I mean, it's not like it was going to happen, in some other way. So I think the net benefit is still there. There's no obligation of the company to, spend any money to produce this product for these people. We think of it as a moral good for sure, in the sense that it's like charitable and stuff like that. But the whole point of charity is that it isn't an obligation. And then also, I do think you have to kind of take into account, it's not like this is just a simple process, right? You can't just take, water from a dirty well in South Africa and, you just put it in a bottle and all of a sudden it becomes clean water. And obviously I was just talking about like, the whole, the boiling and the Beretta filter and stuff like that, right? Those are obviously significantly cheap. But they're for individual use, right? They're not producing gallons upon gallons upon gallons upon gallons of water, which is what you would presumably need in order to actually benefit an entire, village or even society. And that's not free, right? That actually costs a lot of money and takes a lot of labor. And again, it's not something that they're actually, obligated to do.
I'm not
now,
disagreeing that they're not
there's
obligated.
certainly. Say again.
I'm just saying, like, if you're like a water company and you go to like not South Africa, but like the Sahara Desert or something, and you find a village and they walk 10 miles to get clean water and then walk back 10 miles. And you're like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you all this water. And then they start getting reliant on you a little bit. And then you're like, well, you see, guys, now you guys aren't that profitable. So we're going to leave. But like if a corporation actually like wanted to be somewhat viewed as morally good, they would help. I mean, it wouldn't help the corporation, but it would be a moral good for them to help out by providing a service like plumbing or something to get them clean water much easier. And that's my problem with some corporations, say like with like, I mean, this is entirely relevant, but like baby powder, it's been exploited on African people because mothers use it on their children instead of breastfeeding, and that's good for those who can't breastfeed, but you don't produce milk after a certain time, and that's what corporations do sometimes, is they give you a free sample of baby powder, and after like a little bit after you can't produce it anymore, and now you're reliant on the corporation because the only baby formula you can get is from the company, and now you can't like breastfeed. I think that's some situations that corporations are trying to do so that customers are more reliant on their product.
Well, and I think there's two things with that, honestly. I think that because the first thing is, if that is done by the choice, the free choice of the consumer, then I honestly think that the blame does have to be put in the hands of the consumer there. People talk a lot about tobacco companies. To be honest with you, you're purchasing the cigarettes. So I don't really think that, the tobacco company, I wouldn't personally feel comfortable selling tobacco. I think that would violate my own personal morals. Right. But I think really, if you walk down the street with $20 saying, I want tobacco, even in a place where there is no tobacco, somebody will find it and give it to you because they want that $20. But on the flip side, if you walk down the street with tobacco in a society that is firmly committed to not smoking tobacco, you can try and sell it all you like. Doesn't really matter if the people aren't going to buy it. Right. But to something that's more of a necessity, I guess. Right. So you bring up the baby formula thing. Well, women obviously can't produce milk past a certain time. So in that particular instance, would it not be the company actually creating, once again, some kind of a net benefit in that situation? In other words, it's not that you're reliant on this particular company. It's that there's actually a deficiency somewhere that this company has now actually managed to, in some way, pacify.
I guess I didn't explain it as well what I meant by that. Like African people can naturally like produce breast milk, and after a certain amount of time without breastfeeding, you can't do it anymore. And that's how corporations benefit from that, is by giving you formula to go past that time. So then once you're done with the formula, you have to buy more because you can't breastfeed anymore. This is an example I heard online, and I think it's pretty good. I mean, I haven't looked much into it, but that sounds like, benefiting from the consumers by putting them in a situation where they are reliant on you once you give them like one of your products. Because like baby formula and like water aren't like tobacco. They're not exactly wants, they're actually necessities.
Well, and I guess I would have to, look into that a little bit, because I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure about that example in particular. That would be a pretty uncool business practice. I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't approve of something like that if that was actually taking place. But I guess I would just have some questions as to how that sort of thing could be accomplished, right? I don't know.
I mean,
it's an interesting example though, because I think that like, if hypothetically speaking, if we had some sort of a monopoly on all of the world's water, that would certainly be problematic, because at that point you would literally have to go through this corporation in order to get it. But for the most part, we do have laws in capitalist societies against that, to try and prevent that sort of thing from happening. Although whether or not they are successful, I guess, is a different story from company to company.
And that's why I also bring up the point of African countries in their water supply. Like, they have to work out so much farther, and like if a corporation came in, it's like, all right, we'll provide you with water. That's great. You get clean water. It's easier to get to. You don't have to travel as far, but that is not helping their situation at all. That's my main problem with corporations and how they. Yes, there is a need for easy to travel to water, but it doesn't address the problem of you can't get water as easily.
Well, I mean, I guess that would be the thing where I would disagree, because I think in most instances, certainly not all, but I think in most instances it does. I think in most instances you have a situation where a company ends up providing a product, and it gets cheaper and more commonplace over time as a result of the company fulfilling that need. I mean, 100 years ago, even in the United States of America, you certainly weren't able to go and just, purchase whatever kinds of cereal you wanted, or get a $1.50 thing of sausage or something like that. You know what I mean? And I think we do sort of downplay just how ridiculously prosperous the West actually is. I mean, to the point of our poor would make a lot of the people who were even, well off 100 years ago, 200 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, things like that, kind of be like, hey, wow, you really, I mean, like, you look at a feast, for example, of the Roman Caesars, right? And they describe the products and stuff like that, and it's like, I mean, I eat better than that just by virtue of going to a restaurant at any point in time. You know what I mean? Maybe not as much, but I could if I wanted to, right? But like, just like a simple roast pig or something like that, you know what I mean? Seasoned with like oregano or something. It's like, okay, that's it, and I'm not a wealthy person. I'm not even a middle class person. I'm technically under the poverty line in the United States, which I think is completely absurd, but neither here nor there. The point being that that's typically what actually ends up being the result of these markets, right? Is you get better technologies, you get better, products in and of themselves, more abundant products, and in the end, people end up actually having things like basic necessities like food, water, and housing, but also things like incredible luxuries like cars and the internet, in almost every home. In fact, I think at this point you could safely assume that not obviously every single home, but virtually every single home in the United States has the ability to get food, water, and internet. And one of those things is literally is like pure luxury, right? And that's
I'm not saying that that's like the problem with markets is their innovation and like their ability to advance certain products like housing or cars. I'm just saying in some situations they create a dependency on these products. Like it's great we have cars, but now the only way to get to your job sometimes is to buy a car and to drive to there. Like you can't just bike to there, you can't walk to there. I mean, some people can, but like honestly, not everyone can. So it kind of puts a little bit of dependency on these, and it's not bad that there are cars, but it's bad that the corporations are now producing a product that you essentially need nowadays, with them keeping the price. And like, I mean, we can honestly say like cars are at the height. Like there's no need to make any faster cars because we have speed limits, we got all this and that. I mean, you can make better fuel efficiency and like electric cars and whatnot, but they don't need to be so expensive. And like you don't need certain reliance, and like there are alternatives to them, but like the market doesn't like that. Because if you like green energy like 30 years ago would have been like completely killed by the market. I mean, it was heavily lobbied against with the revelation that all the freaking not ethanol, I forget what it's called, but like the pollution was just putting like certain chemicals on everyone. It was just killing people, or not killing people, but it was like everywhere. It was very harmful for the environment, and like lobbyists were just heavy against that. And I think market wants to preserve itself by justifying its products with I don't know. Markets are trying to justify its products while trying to silence harms is not a good market. Like if you have a housing market that only produces condos and not everyone can afford that, I would say that's a negative. And like that's harmful for people. Because that means they have to be reliant on, they have to get more jobs or something like that.
See, and I wouldn't even necessarily disagree with that. I just think that the market itself ends up correcting a lot of those issues in a lot of ways. I mean, the car example is a really good example, right? I mean, cars are readily affordable by virtually everybody. Not necessarily brand new, right? I mean, it costs like $38,000 to get a Camry, for example. A brand new Camry, but I can go get a 10-year-old Camry that's going to last me the next 20 years for like $4,000. You know what I mean? And that's the vast majority of people can't afford that, at least can afford that in the sense that, they'll have to pay some, maybe a loan every now and then or something like that. But I mean, even the banks too, like a lot of the times when you're paying off a loan, it can be as small as like $50 a month. Right. And virtually everybody has $50 a month in this country. Right. I mean, we often think of it as if that's not the case, but we know it's the case. Right. A lot of people spend their money in ways that aren't particularly wise. People, a lot of times, there's a lot of people who smoke weed, use alcohol, smoke cigarettes, get Netflix, go to whatever. Right. I mean, there's so many different things. Obviously, certain things are more beneficial, I guess, than others. But none of it is needed. You don't need to see the next episode of Stranger Things, or have, the latest Xbox or something like that. And I can just kind of say, I know this is anecdote, but I have this, from personal experience. I've never been somebody who's been wealthy, at least not since I can recall. When I was a really young kid, I did live in sort of a suburban area, but I left that at around the age of 9. And I've also never had any sort of a serious struggle for necessities, because both my dad and then later on myself never, spent money that we didn't have on things that we didn't need, right? And by the way, I do still have a lot of times money for things that I don't need, like Taco Bell or going to Cold Stone or something like that. You know what I mean? Like these things become self-correcting, right? The prices get smaller over time. The wages do end up going up over time. Although we have had a stagnation recently, of course, as we were kind of talking about earlier. You know, and all these different things to where it's like, sure, you rely on these things a lot of times, but if you're actually being wise with your money in very reasonable ways, you have these things. You can have your car, you can have your water bill and plenty of food and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you just have to, sacrifice a Netflix or a StreamYards account. You know what I mean?
And I don't entirely I agree that like there are some things people can just live without, but I would also like argue that like when I brought up the whole thing of baby formula, that's not like you don't need that, but it makes it a much easier thing to do than breastfeeding, and then you like start to rely on that. And I'm not saying that's the same thing with like Netflix or anything like that. No, like you don't. It's not like you need it to breathe or anything. It's corporations like to put advertisement and like marketing that makes it seems like you need to do this. Like that's like why we still have people smoking like cigarettes or whatnot. Like there's not as much advertisement for smoking, of course, because that's heavily like government like enforced to not do that anymore. But like now that's not the market correcting itself. That's the government involving itself into the market to do that.
Well, and that's a good example for cigarettes, but I can give you a perfectly, fine example in reverse of that with fast food. The government tried, but they failed tremendously in trying to go after fast food. The market, on the other hand, has actually provided some pretty good alternatives with things like Subway, Tzatziki's, Kashi coming out and getting better cereals. I know that's not fast food, but it's still, countering an incredibly unhealthy cereal for a relatively similar price. Right. And so we do actually have examples, abound really of the market correcting itself.
Subway isn't that healthy. Like their bread's like 60% sugar.
Well, I mean, it does depend on the kind of bread for sure. I mean, they do provide like their 9 grains and stuff like that. Most people will go with things that taste better because it's kind of human nature.
But like, and like we also have to look at like the health industry and like reason why some Americans are unhealthy. Like the whole like pyramid of health. Like at the top was your desserts, and at the bottom was like all the grains and stuff. That wasn't entirely like, I mean that was like government enforced, but that also had a little bit to do with misknowledge. And when the knowledge was corrected on what it is, people still went with it. They're like, I need all this, bread because it makes me healthy. But then they start eating white bread, which makes them unhealthy. And I think that's just more of corporations. I want to say cannibalizing. No, attacking or like appealing to certain beliefs in society about being healthy, and trying to demonstrate like, well, we make 6 foot long sandwiches where you can get lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, and whatnot, and that makes you healthy. And like the whole like concept of being healthy, kind of like rubs with the corporation's motives to make profit. But like it doesn't have to hold those values to be entirely true to make a profit, like with Subway.
But we do have laws against that sort of thing as well, right? Like false advertising, right? Like
false advertising.
Subway can't like say again.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, right, and that's kind of like just, I guess, with the Subway. So, with their Italian bread, right, which I guess is probably their most common one, or probably the herbs one, the herbs and cheese. Either of those two breads, right? If they actually had false nutrition facts about those breads, right? You could actually sue them for that and potentially destroy the company. I mean, a lot of the companies, I don't know, Subway's probably too big to get, hit over to go fall over one suit, but a lot of companies will have serious setbacks over a lawsuit, and especially a lawsuit that kind of like exposes them as fraudulent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, fraudulent claims by corporations is a thing that you can get sued for if you're a corporation and you do false advertising. But I'm not saying they're false advertising. I'm saying they're appealing to certain like stereotypes or like ideas of what healthy is. Like they would have like, the actor for Thor like watching like a car wreck or like eating a sandwich and saying like, man, and like he flexes his muscles and he's like, I feel great. And then like that's not entirely false marketing. That's just more appealing to the whole idea of he's a celebrity, he has some ethos, this is good. Like therefore it's a good sandwich, so you should go buy our product. That's my problem. Like it's not entirely false marketing. It's just more of toying with the whole idea of healthy and like other ideas. Like someone doesn't need a car that goes 150
Well, and
miles per hour.
I guess you know, but everybody knows that, right? Like so as an example, right? You have the have you seen on YouTube the commercials with I don't know the name of the guy, but he's some comedian. He'll do commercials for glasses and for soap. You may have heard that it's like you're not a dish, you're a man, right?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that guy at all?
It's like the guy, like he has like long hair, it's kind of dirtyish blonde, and he's like, "You're a real man," and like just like I don't know, he does something crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So that dude's whole shtick, which has now been adopted by like 4 different companies, is playing off of the absurdity of commercials because everybody kind of knows that, right? They know that the play on nostalgia is bull and the play on the the sort of health stuff is bull and stuff like that. And so a lot of people really are getting down to like nitty gritty when it comes to that stuff, or just what they like, right? In other words, if you're going to go to Subway for the health factor, right? You're probably not going to go there for the Italian because you're aware of the marketing schemes. Everybody is. So you go there for the wheat breads because you're serious about it. That's the only reason you would be going for the health, right? And now I guess I'm making some assumptions about humans there, but it does seem to me that, like that we're very aware, I think, of some of those tricks of, oh, this is a celebrity. John Cena endorsed this product or, all that other kind of stuff.
I mean, but like then you can like look at like see like the release of the first Xbox that had freaking god damn, what's his name? The one famous wrestler who's like not John Cena. The Rock. He had like Rock do the promotion for that. And it's like him and Bill Gates talking about the Xbox, saying like, "Oh man, I really like the 60 gigs on this or whatever." And it's not, and that's like how like it promotes ethos with its products. It's not like it's advertising it as healthy or like you need this. It's more like you really want this because it does this and that, and the Rock said this. That's like my problem with some corporations is sometimes they mix that with things that actually affect people, like smoking or like eating too much white bread or something like that, or like eating too much Subway.
Well, and it's not even that I don't get that too. I guess it's just that I feel like I personally put the blame more heavily on the consumer. And believe me, there are a lot of problems that I have personally involved myself in combating that, it would be really, really easy to just conclude, well, the government should get involved. And I'm not even saying that as, any sort of an insult or anything like that. I genuinely, like, so for example, the pornography industry, I'm very opposed to as a Christian, right? And really just, I think, I'm not real down with a lot of the modern feminists and stuff like that, but to a large extent, I do agree with a lot of the sex negative feminists when they talk about the degradation of the modeling industry and of the entertainment industry and of the fashion industry and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, women's clothing, just as an example, is explicitly designed for sexual purposes. Even the most modest of them, like skinny jeans, is still explicitly designed to show off figure. That's very degrading, in my opinion. But people are going to continuously buy those clothes. They're going to continuously buy pornography. They're going to continuously buy Maxim magazines and stuff like that. And unless they stop that, right, there's no, I could say, hey, government, you should make pornography illegal or something like that. But that's a violation of people's freedoms, in my opinion. I think you do have the right to be degrading and stupid and all this other kind of stuff. You know what I mean? But so, and frankly, it doesn't do anything also. I mean, people, will continue to do what they're going to do unless you change, the actual atmosphere and the culture. But you know what I mean? So like, it would be really easy to get for me to say, well, let's get the government involved in this situation to make the world more moral, but it doesn't actually do anything to address the problem of women and girls being treated as if they're objects in the United States. Or, you know, another example with Hershey's candy bars. You know, Hershey's candy bars is technically not actually involved in the slave trade, but they are, and everybody really knows it, right? And there's been tons of documentaries on it, and CNN has reported on it, and Fox has reported on it, and so on and so forth, right? And it'd be really easy for me to say, well, the government should just go in and shut down Hershey's candy bars, right? But that doesn't really address the problem. People are still going out buying those candy bars knowing that they're coming from slave labor. You know what I mean? And like, I personally think that is really where the blame lies, is on the consumer.
I mean, let's like take that example. Like, an example would be like the oil industry back in I think it was like the 70s or 80s, I think, and like the health risk of actually pollution and like how like mufflers weren't really used or something, and like it was really terrible for the environment and people in general. They were getting sick and whatnot, and this wasn't like largely reported because, you know, freaking not OPEC, but like oil corporations would be silencing them, and so that would not exactly bring awareness to the consumers about what their products do exactly. Now I could say like after it was brought to light that this is harming people, that kind of shifts onto the consumer's fault. But if the consumers don't know exactly what their product, like what they're using does, I mean, it does fall under some legal liability of corporations, like false advertising, or like, I don't know, like liability if like your toothpaste makes your teeth fall out. But there's other factors that corporations purposely ignore. Like you don't see like Pepsi or like water bottle ads saying like, oh, like once you're done with the plastic, throw it into the recycling because it hurts turtles. Like people know it hurts turtles, but corporations don't really bring light to that in their advertisement. They just want to push their product without consideration for what their products really do to the environment or others.
Well, and I would definitely agree that that's a problem, and I would actually say that I would absolutely, you know, support like legal punishments for companies that do that sort of thing.
Because
In fact,
the market doesn't fix that exactly. It just, I wouldn't say encourages it, but it sees it as a means of getting the most product out without bringing light to the issues of that. And the market won't really do anything about it if there is no light on the issues.
and that's perfectly fair, right? But I do think that we can still maintain free markets and also have that be something that's, you know, legally punished. And I think, you know, there's a lot of different examples we could have with that. With the example that you kind of gave there, I do think that, and this did actually happen with the cigarette companies. I don't know if it happened with the oil industry, but I know it happened with the cigarette companies. They actually got legally punished because of the fact that they were hiding that information, both with new legislation and with massive lawsuits. And that new legislation is a big part of the reason why we have things like false advertisement law and stuff like that today.
Like
I guess you could argue that. Sorry, go ahead.
How would you, like, if you're in like Africa and like the corporations there are like, all right, here's like water, like here's like clean water and whatnot, and like they give you this water, but then you eventually realize it's not so good. How do you bring legal liability to that corporation if they're international? Exactly. If you know you're living like a small tribe in Africa and your government isn't really big about corporations doing wrong things, is that on the fault of the consumers, or is that on the of the government, or is it kind of like a little bit of both?
I think it depends on the level of information that the consumer has. It could definitely be both. If they're just completely not in the know, or the government refuses to help them when they are in the know, then that would definitely be the result of a corrupt government. And you know, those things do happen for sure. And I can't, you know, sit here and, you know, oh, the market prevents that from ever happening or anything like that. I mean, communist China, quote unquote, has proven that definitely is not the case, because they're not actually communist China. They're actually a very capitalistic, and they still manage to have their thumb on everybody, just lead to freedom, I guess, in that sense, which is why I wouldn't be an ANCAP. But I do think that if you are that group, so there's a couple things that could be done, I guess. There's of course the thing that nobody wants, but sometimes I guess it would have to get to that point. And this is the unfortunate thing with Africa, is that it's always getting to that point, but violent revolution. I don't tend to like that as an example, just because I really think that everything possible should be done to avoid that kind of a thing. I also understand as far as corruption, crime, and stuff like that is concerned. So it's kind of hard to pass judgment. Obviously, another option, if you can, would be to try and peacefully change the system from within, politically speaking. I'm not sure how democratic, Africa as a whole would be if you sort of just took the pulse. But I know individual nations can be, like South Africa, for example, can be sometimes significantly more democratic than its neighbors, although it is prone to having some people who are a little bit autocratic, I guess.
Is it possible for us, like as like America, to hold a certain corporation, say like they're international, like Coca-Cola or something, and they're giving out like cocaine-filled drinks down to Africa, and Africa's government's not really doing anything about it? Could we hold them liable for that? Should we or should we not?
Absolutely, actually. And, I'll be honest with you. I actually would diverge from a lot of my fellow, I guess people tend to call us paleo conservatives. I like the term constitutionalist, but I would diverge from them in that, like, for example, like the Hershey's Corporation that I brought up earlier. I would have if hypothetically I'm president, I would have my Department of Justice just combing through anything I could find to see if they are like actually violating a slavery law I could get them on, and then punish them as severely as I possibly could. Because I know there's a lot of technicalities that, prevent them from being, prosecuted for basically having slaves get their chocolate. But we all, like I said, everybody is fully aware at this point, those who pay attention at least, that the Hershey's Corporation is actively involved in the slave trade. And I think there should be a way to get them for that. Now, if that doesn't legally exist at the moment, then perhaps legislation needs to be passed that actually finds a way to do that while respecting the free enterprise of Americans who are not involved in things like the slave trade. But I would definitely agree with the progressive when they say that there are corporations that absolutely need to be like prosecuted and to the highest degree. And I'd say there's a lot of them, actually. Some of them I don't think we have any power over. Because they're not American, and I don't know how that would work. The example that immediately comes to mind with that is Pornhub, actually, because they have been recently exposed for being all but definitely involved in sex trafficking of children. But that's Canada, right? There's nothing we can really do about that, I guess. But there are plenty of corporations here in the States. I think Alphabet is one that should be that should have charges brought against it for tons of things. Election tampering, not only in our country, but in other countries. Sort of, what would you call it if you're like withholding information, I guess? I guess I don't know what the technical term is.
I haven't figured it.
But most of the tech giants, it's basically, I think Facebook, they should all, Amazon for sure. I am definitely on board with the progressives when they say that Amazon needs to have charges brought against them for monopolistic purposes, for definitely abusing their power, not only here, but also overseas, being involved in sweatshops, things like that. Apple, a lot of them. The thing is, though, is I think that the main reason why this isn't happening is actually because of these kind of cronyists and lobbyists who get involved, right? And they start paying off politicians who then start getting the government involved in ways that actually lets these guys sort of skate past, you know what I mean? But no, I guess the long and short of it, I completely agree with that. Like that we should definitely have a system that will prosecute companies when they're involved in obviously egregious actions.
Yeah. I'll be here for like another 10 minutes. I gotta do something soon. But how would the market exactly adjust? Like if there's like internationally, like international markets, how would those like address certain issues? Like Coca-Cola giving cocaine-filled drinks to Africa. Like how would that exactly happen? I mean, you can do boycotts, but if Africa's a huge market for like some corporations, they wouldn't exactly suffer as much, but like they would see like decreases in sales or whatever, but they would still make a profit even if some places boycott their product.
Well, there'd be a couple things you could actually do. The first thing, I think that, tariffs are actually, I think, a very positive thing. Um, One thing that I think was kind of interesting that everybody sort of forgot once 2016 happened is that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders actually had the exact same trade policies. There's a reason for that. It's because tariffs actually work. They're a very good way to get companies to sort of bow to your whim, so to speak, right? And so if you just place some sort of a ban on companies that let's say in this particular example, if a company is actively involved in the illegal drug trade in another country, they may not operate in the United States. And then they decide to move and you just straight up embargo them, right? Because you can actually, I mean, you can put a tariff on a specific company. You don't have to put it on a nation per se, right? I mean, what are they going to do? The United States is the largest market in the entire world. It's like twice the size of the European market and almost 3 times the size of the Chinese market, if I'm remembering correctly, as far as like people who actually just buy stuff, right?
I think so.
Well, I mean, you're right. You think of that. I mean, that would be immensely. In fact, we know how damaging that would be to these companies because we do it to countries, right? Devastating that is to their economies. I mean, those are nations. If we did that to a corporation, it'd be like instantaneous. You know what I mean? Because not all corporations, of course, are less powerful than nations, but the vast majority of them are.
But I'm not talking government involvement. I'm saying like free markets. How would they address that?
I think boycotts would have the same general effect because of the power of the market. If people actually did it, and that is the main issue, you would have to get the population to actually have a problem with it. But if the American population, even a third of the American population who actually buys Coca-Cola, stopped buying Coca-Cola, they would change their business practices immediately, guaranteed, because that is a massive amount of money and they won't make it up anywhere else. They might potentially be able to make it up in China in a couple decades, because China's on the rise for sure economically, but nobody wants to wait that long. And a lot of people can't even afford to wait that long. Right. But that is the main problem, is just you would have to get people actually on board with it and make sure they're not actually trying to purchase these products. Which you can only do in a social way. I mean, it's the same thing as like, not to relate this to my religion, but it is kind of the same thing as religion in the sense that it's like, you don't want the government to say you must be a Christian or anything like that, because not only is that completely ingenuine, but it also violates your freedoms. What you want is for people to actually have genuine conversion, right? And I think the same applies with these sorts of things. It doesn't, the point isn't necessarily to get government involved, although, like I said, the tariffs and everything like that would certainly work. You really want to get the population to just not be interested in buying from companies that work in, operate sweatshops or slave camps, or potentially give cocaine to people in Africa, right? Or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. And I can see how like free markets can try to do that, but I don't think that's entirely realistic with how information would spread. I'm like, the internet exists. It's very globalized how information is transferred. But some things just get swept under the freaking rug. Like, sweatshops. Like Apple was caught on multiple occasions of having sweatshops in China for exploiting millions of people, or like fast fashion, exploiting all Indonesian people. It's open there, but like it's usually not brought aware. And I don't know, I wouldn't say it's entirely the consumer's fault, but rather the market's fault and how it treats negative lighting on their products, or like production. Because I don't see how consumers are at fault if there is news about a malpractice or some, bad practice or whatever, but like it doesn't get talked about at all. Like it's not like everyone like whispers about it, but no one says it out loud. It's more like generally people don't look up, does Coca-Cola sell cocaine to African children or whatever, or like does like, I mean, people do, but it's not to this such a large scale that there would be a boycott that would actually affect the multi-billion company of Coca-Cola.
Well, it kind of, I mean, yes and no, honestly, because like with that the chocolate example, right? I mean, that's a pretty commonly known fact. It's becoming less common because it's more of my generation and before. I think probably those who were probably born anywhere in the 90s decade tend to have a lot of, because that was just a big thing, right? People just kind of like, I don't know, they just freshly discovered it almost, it seems, and then it became a hot button topic for people to talk about, right? The Nestle and Hershey has, basically slave camps. And I think Nestle actually did end up changing theirs, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about that. But they didn't do anything about it is the point, right? Like, and by they, I mean the population. Like people just, well, yeah, but I really like, I mean, I even talked to people who was like, but I really like Hershey's chocolate bars. And it's like, okay, but like slaves, right? Not talking about anything that's not incredibly serious. We're talking about like people being taken from families at like 5-6 years old and then living a life of just constant torturous labor, right, as somebody else's property. But you like chocolate bars, whatever. I mean, but you know what I mean? And that's like, there's nothing that I think can be done about that unless that person is, and a combination of those people, of course, because it can't just be one person, actually decides to make that change in themselves, right? Because the information does come out. It almost always does. And a lot of times it's obvious, right? Like as an example with the sexualization of young girls that I brought up earlier, right? I mean, everybody knows about that. It's blatantly obvious. You don't have to go find some documentary that says, Viacom is pushing forward hypersexualized images of girls. That's just obviously the case, right? But people still buy it because they like the music or they like the movie or maybe they like the sexualization, whatever it is, right? And I mean, you can do this with so many examples. It's not even funny. The Tyson chicken scandal that, was kind of a big deal in 2010, 2012. It was like, oh, they're doing horrible things to all their chickens and they're just incredibly cruel. And Food Inc. came out and then people just continue to buy Tyson chicken. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know. Sorry,
is that entirely their fault? Like consumers, like, I mean, educational wise, like some consumers don't understand the implications of doing some things. Like they're like, yeah, I know buying chocolate does that, but it's only like $2. I'm not, putting money in the pockets of pedophiles or whatever. And that's like the common thought I would say with some consumers. And I would disagree with the whole idea. Is like, okay, they're willfully giving money to corporations because they believe in their practices or whatever. I think it's just more miscommunication and like severity of the situation that some corporations are in, and that's why I would say like education's really important, especially about economics and like what corporations do and the products you buy and like what that means exactly. And so like maybe if everyone like knew, like, I mean, yeah, like everyone knows, like, whatever, like Pornhub or whatever does like illegal activity with children, or like Hershey has slave labor. But like if people understand that information but don't fully comprehend the severity of it, they might just downplay it. And downplaying it, I think, is not because they are selfish and don't care. I think it's just more of an educational standpoint, and like a little bit of too much individualism, I think. Like there's no sympathy of extreme
Yeah,
individualism.
and I guess it's funny. I agree with a lot of the very last sentence there, right? But I do disagree with, I guess, the general point, right? I do think it's very much a it's not. I would disagree with the statement that people agree with those practices. I think that the vast majority of these people who would know about a certain practice and yet partake in the company's product anyways, it's not that they agree. It would be more of it doesn't. I mean, I do, I guess, kind of agree with you that it doesn't impact them enough on an emotional level for them to care. Right. But I just personally, I see in that selfishness and sort of moral failing on the point. Like you should have a society that either A, doesn't want to partake in things that inherently do things like that, like, like the certain industries that I've pointed out about, sexualizing girls and stuff like that, or cigarette industries or stuff like that, or doesn't want to partake in companies who have practices that are of an evil nature, even if it's not inherently so. Like, there's nothing about chocolate that demands slavery, but that particular chocolate company shouldn't be around, or at least should not partake in slavery. And I would go as far as to say definitely shouldn't be around. I mean, I personally, I don't know if you've noticed since I brought it up like 20 times, but I actually have a really huge problem with that one in particular. It drives me up a freaking wall that people just give Hershey's chocolate billions upon billions of dollars with active knowledge that they are involved in a very brutal slave trade. It drives me crazy.
I need to leave, but I would like to finish off with final thoughts, I guess. Yeah, I think there's some things where we can agree upon about like consumers and whatnot, and we have many things we disagree on exactly about like what markets are and like what they do and like how do consumers interact with markets, and like where does responsibility fall on? Like, does it fall on the corporations, consumers, or whatever? But like my final thoughts, I guess, would be corporations have a liability to provide the best information they can about their products and services and how they get their products. But I think we also need the government to reinforce the thought in consumers that like be aware of what you're doing. And then like I think individualism has brought in a lack of sympathy in society when it comes to like, oh, I just bought my my daily amount of chocolate from the candy store or whatever. Like it's the repetitiveness and unawareness, or like not thought-provoking ideas of what they are buying exactly gives money to. And which is why I would say it's not like the market itself won't fix itself, because society itself won't fix itself either. Like society and markets are kind of independent on each other, or like dependent on each other, but there are some parts of society that are completely independent from markets, and I think that would be the morality that some markets, like market practices, are. And I think the government can greatly turn that independent from market thought to a positive to influence their interactions with markets.
Well, and I guess there's some agreement I would even have with that. And I guess so for kind of my final thoughts, at least for this conversation, because depending on if anybody else wants to join in, I might go for a little longer. But nonetheless, I would just say that I think the disagreement we have, honestly, I think is just transcending economics, really, and is more of kind of a philosophical question about human nature itself. And I'd be interested in having a conversation with you actually about that sometime, because I think that does kind of end up being where it boils down, is not only the who's to blame aspect, but like what exactly the nature of why people do the things that they do is. But nonetheless, I appreciate this conversation. Been super respectful and all that, and also thought provoking. So I appreciate that tremendously.
Yeah, and thanks for having me and letting me talk for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so,
see you whenever.
Go ahead.
See you whenever. Unless you have.
Oh yeah, for sure. Have a great night, man.
Thanks.
So link is in the description if anybody else does want to join. I'm not entirely sure who all is here. I do see Nightmare and LPP. At least we're here at some point in time. So shalom to you guys if you are still here. It's an open topic, so you can talk. Oh, the Rage was here. Nice. Okay. About to talk secession on my. That's not how you spell secession, but that's okay. It would be hot, he says. Actually, you know, if I hope he ends up watching this at some point, because the thing is it wouldn't be hot because, as you can clearly see by the rules I've laid out in my description, I will not be allowing that kind of stuff. We can have conversations, absolutely, but I'm just not interested in anything like that. And by the way, I'd just like to point out for those of you guys, or to announce for those of you guys who are here, there will be some rage-filled content, if you know what I mean, coming to this channel here soon. The man has just completely and totally denounced me and everything that I am. I guess he can't really stand your boy CJ here anymore. He's really been looking for reasons to disapprove of me ever since I had the I made the claim that I was a pro-life radical by saying that we absolutely should have legal punishments for excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. That we should absolutely have legal punishments for people who are involved in the crime of baby murder. But really, even before that, I mean, ever since our very first discussion, which was the conversation on whether or not people should take down Confederate statues, with me saying no, they should not, he's been trying to basically find some way, shape, or form to disavow me and hate me and call me dishonest and all this other sort of stuff. I'm pretty sure, I mean, if he's saying he's talking about secession, I would almost guarantee that I am the focal point of that conversation, because I personally have been advocating for a peaceful national divorce for the country. I think it would be a means to avoid civil war, as we are clearly disunified. And I don't think there's anything that prevents it from being peaceful. In fact, if anything, I think if we just kind of agree to go, that would actually avoid us having to go to, blows with each other and stuff like that. And there are tons of examples. Because I'm a Christian, I'll point out having their herdsmen fight in the land of Canaan, that they would just split. And so Lot went to Jordan to be a neighbor, and right, which is now Israel, of course, and they remain friends. Right now, of course, that's a biblical example, but that obviously is the best example that as far as I believe, right? But if you just want, a modern secular example, Albania seceded from, I believe, who was it? I think Yugoslavia. I don't remember who Albania seceded from, but it was a peaceful secession. You had the peaceful secession of nations from the disillusioned USSR, right? I mean, realistically, in theory, it could have been a peaceful secession here in the United States, but the British just decided that they weren't having that. And that tends to be the case, right? There's always one side that's like, no, I don't want you to leave, kind of like an abusive spouse, but nonetheless, not always, of course, right? In the case of, for example, like the American Civil War, the South did attack first, and of course was trying to fight for the preservation of slavery, at least in 7 of the states' instances. I digress. Point being, I think that secession is a wise idea. And I don't even like the word secession because I don't think that's the right word. I don't think any of the two parties involved here, at least in their own opinion, is disavowing the Constitution or our national when they split into East and West, right? Where it's just kind of it's cultural differences and different interpretations as to what that actually means. I personally do believe that their interpretation of the Constitution is actually flat out wrong. They want what they call a living interpretation. I like an originalist interpretation. But nonetheless, I prefer the term national split or national divorce, because it would be like there's a one America and another America. And we could even be allies, right? We could even use different governments and technically different borders, right? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. The only thing I've ever actually seen from anybody who disagrees with that is progressives, and they're just saying, "Oh, you just want civil war, you're a seditionist," all this other sort of stuff. Even though that is explicitly the reason why I want a national split, is to avoid that sort of stuff, and I say that constantly. But of course, who cares for honesty? I'm going to have some content here, basically just exposing some of the ridiculousness and absurdities of Rage that have come out recently. His blatant admission that he's a social justice warrior, his blatant admission that he is totally okay with violence against people and doxing people. John's admission that he would like federal government watching people who disagree with him, like myself, so on and so forth. Rage calling himself an anti-theist. Rage admitting, even though he would never actually notice this because he's so blinded by his own ideology, that the Proud Boys are not, in fact, racist. And of course, just tons of dishonesty in regards to misrepresentations of me, which, by the way, Rage, if you ever do watch this, or John, or Leophilius, or any of your other ilk, I'm waiting on that video, but where you expose me for all the lies I apparently told and all the times when I was backtracking, right? Saying something on Twitter and then saying something completely different on YouTube. I'm waiting for that video, bud. Of course, you don't have that video because that content doesn't exist. But I've gone and done you the favor of announcing it on YouTube. So, make my day. Well, it sort of wasted all the time I have on that. So, I guess if nobody else wants to join, we might end up just kind of getting out of here. I do have a little bit of recording and stuff I want to do to kind of let you guys know. LPP says apparently I'm also a hardcore racist. Yeah, that's the nature of these guys, man. Like, and by the way, just so you guys are aware, right? This has all been coming from one side, right? It's Leophilius, John Peterson, Raging Atheist, etc., who are speaking with this vitriol, right? Who are trying to go after people, who are wanting people doxxed and having the government go after them and all this other sort of stuff. This isn't coming from anybody on the right. This isn't coming from Smokey, from Maddox, from myself, from Brother Nicholas, right? This isn't coming from any of us. It's coming from lefties. Why? Because they are violent. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is, right? We saw this constantly with all of the riots that happened for months on end that did $2 billion plus in damage, killed 30 plus people, right? With politicians who are on the left, like the current vice president of the United States, who's really functionally the president of the United States, I believe. But nonetheless, endorsing these riots, advocating for them. Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, Maxine Waters, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the rest of the squad, as they're called. The squad. So stupid. Anyways. Oh, that reminds me, actually. So here's some announcements I can have. So me and Smokey Saint will actually have a debate with Leophilius and Cider and Port, who I guess formerly went by the moniker "Religion is BS," but explicit in that last part. I only actually even know him from a debate he had with Smokey Saint and John Maddox. But nonetheless, me and Smokey will be debating Leo and Cider and Port. I believe if everything goes through, we haven't had this confirmed on James's end, but it'll be on Modern Day Debate if this ends up being confirmed on February 12th, which is a Friday at about 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So it'd be 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, not specific. Anyways, so yeah, that's something that we may or may not have scheduled here soon. And also before that, actually on the 3rd, also on Modern Day Debate, and this has actually been confirmed. This is a Wednesday. I will be debating both David Fitzgerald and a Buddhist by the name of Brenton. I don't know if that's his first or last name. I guess I'm not too familiar with him, but nonetheless, basically the question is, who is Jesus? Fitzgerald, who is an atheist, will be taking the position that Jesus is a fictional character, didn't actually exist. He's a mythicist. Brenton, I believe, if I understand his position correctly, is going to be taking the position that he exists, or existed rather, and that he was a good teacher, but just basically not God, or maybe he's, of the opinion that he was actually influenced by Buddhist teachings, which is actually a common belief amongst Buddhists. One that is demonstrably false, but we'll wait and see if that's actually what he believes. And then, of course, I'm going to be taking the position that he is exactly who he said he was, the Son of God, God in the flesh, the Logos, the salvation of the world, who came to die for our sins, crucified on the cross, rise again on the 3rd day, and that if you repent and submit to his lordship, in Jesus Christ's name, you shall be saved. All glory to him. And I am not going to, just so you guys are aware, there's no tone down on the religious rhetoric, quote unquote, because there never should be. If you believe the Bible, okay, then your scholarly arguments should be in defense of the Bible, right? That doesn't mean you have to get preachy. Don't get me wrong. Although in many instances you should. The point is to evangelize. But what it does mean is that you are defending the scripture, right? So when we go, for example, to a Christ mythicist, we're defending Jesus' existence. We're not just defending Jesus' existence as a person who did exist. We're affirming Jesus' existence as a person who does exist, risen from the grave, because the person we're defending is the Messiah, right? So we need to always be aware of that. Fundamentalism is not a bad thing, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, logical, plausible, probable, John Maddox, who is in the live chat here today, is a perfect example of that in regards to young earth creationism, in my opinion, right? You can approach things from a scholarly perspective while still affirming what it is the scripture actually says and affirming what it is that the scripture actually teaches, right? In that case, of course, it's a literal creation by the actual spoken word of God, right? God said and there was, and happening in the literal time frame that the Bible says, right? So we'll have those 2 debates scheduled. I'm going to try and get rescheduled my conversation with Richard Carrier, because that never ended up happening because of all of my issues and also because I kind of suck. So I apologize for that. But hopefully that'll end up actually being moved forward as well. And then, like I said, we'll have Unapologetics Light this Saturday on the question of Lilith. And of course, on Sunday, we'll have our Old Testament canonization unapologetics episode. May have Watchdogs this Friday or Wednesday and Friday. I'm not 100% certain on that yet. But we'll see, of course, what happens. And I am going to be launching a second channel here soon that is entirely media related. If anybody's interested in that sort of stuff, my first thing on it will be actually a movie review of the DreamWorks movie, Joseph King of Dreams. And that's all the sort of announcements that I have here. One last call, I guess, if anybody does want to join. Link is in the description, but if not, of course, this will be the end of this. So I appreciate you guys being here. Please do like, please do share. Questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything like that in the comment section below. Once this video is not live anymore, of course. Please do subscribe if you like this content. We have, of course, open rooms as well as debates. And the 2 bread and butters here, we have Unapologetics, where we discuss and study religion, study the Word of God, and do apologetics. And the Watchdog, where we actually discuss geopolitics, economics, news, and things of that nature. So if you're interested in any of those things, please do subscribe, hit that bell so you actually get notification. You can also support us financially at that little Patreon that you might see on the bottom. Patreon.com/TheCynicogue. That's where you can find me on virtually anything, which reminds me, if you want to follow me on social media, Gab, Minds, Parler, whenever it gets back up, Facebook, Twitter, you can find me as TheCynicogue. The display name will always be different, but I am on virtually all of these websites, and I always go by TheCynicogue. So with that, I appreciate you guys being here with me. Have a good rest of your day. All glory to Jesus Christ, our Savior. And yeah, we'll see you soon.